Welcome, everyone. I am Mickey Ibarra, founder and chairman of the Latino Leaders Network. Delighted to welcome you to our 33rd Tribute to Mayors. This is our first virtual, but our 33rd event. We convene this event normally during the summer and winter meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors to honor a mayor that is doing right by our community, namely including us. And of course, today at our 33rd Tribute to Mayors, we are delighted to honor Mayor Francis Suarez of the city of Miami with the Antonio Villaraigosa Leadership Award. Regrettably, the Conference of Mayors canceled their summer meeting that was scheduled to open today in Austin due to the pandemic, which we're all, confronting. Fortunately, due to the continued support of our great sponsors, we're able to bring you this 30-minute program on the regularly scheduled date. So with that, we're going to provide an opportunity for two of our premier sponsors to offer brief remarks. We'll start with Bank of America. Angie Garcia Lathrop is our champion at Bank of America, and representing them today is Andres de Corral, who is the Regional Managing Director of Merrill Lynch. Andres?
Thank you, Mickey. Today, the economic and racial inequalities that have existed for too long in our communities have been amplified as we collectively navigate a global pandemic. In response, Bank of America has made a $1 billion four-year commitment to accelerate progress on issues affecting people and communities of color. This work builds on our longstanding support of economic mobility and workforce development programs, sharpening the focus to accelerate resources and add emphasis on health services during the health and humanitarian crisis. I am incredibly honored to serve on our Hispanic Latino Advisory Council at the bank. Nearly 200 leaders across the company who have offered input and guidance as we have developed this new initiative. In the words of our CEO, Brian Moynihan, we all need to do more. And it will take strong leadership to forge ahead. That's why we at Bank of America are so pleased to honor Mayor Suarez for his unwavering commitment in Miami. Mayor Suarez has demonstrated a true spirit of public service and set an example for so many of us in the Miami community. Leaders like Mayor Suarez and partners like Latino Leaders Network are critical to the path forward. From all of us at Bank of America, thank you.
Thank you so much, Andres. And now our second premier sponsor, Walmart. I'd like to thank Amy Hill for her longstanding support of the Tribute to Mayors. And we're delighted that our friend Javier Angulo, who is the Senior Director of Community Relations, will now deliver sponsor remarks for Walmart. Javier?
Thank you, Mickey. On behalf of the 1.4 million associates across the country, we thank all the mayors and leaders here today in this virtual tribute to mayors. We join Mickey Ibarra and the entire team in recognizing Mayor Francis Suarez for leading your community during what I believe is one of the most difficult times in our lifetimes. I and the entire Walmart team share the anguish, trauma, and heartache that we are experiencing in America right now. It has been a very challenging 3 months. At a time when our response to the COVID-19 crisis has brought out the best of us, what took place earlier this month and continues today is further proof that we must be vigilant in standing against racism and also discrimination. Doing so is not only at the heart and value of our company, it is at the core of the most basic principles of human rights, dignity, and justice. Please know that we are here to help out and be part of the solution, whether it is to support your communities in addressing the health disparities that were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, or by supporting your efforts as your communities begin to heal. We need to support each other and come together until we, as a nation, can confront and address these hard realities. We will never achieve the best that we can be as a nation. So thank you again, Mickey, for having us here. And we appreciate our opportunity to address all the mayors today. Thank you.
Grateful for your support, Javier. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank Southwest Airlines, the official airline of the Latino Leaders Network. Lydia Martinez has been our partner since 2007, and we are grateful. And now, before we get to special guest remarks, I'd like to ask for all of your help. Please engage with us at hashtag Latino Leaders Network. Encourage your networks to join us in progress. And now, special guest remarks. We're so delighted to be joined by Mayor Brian Barnett of Rochester Hills, Michigan. Mayor Barnett is the 77th president of the United States Conference of Mayors, no stranger to the Latino Leaders Network, having delivered greetings in Washington, D.C. most recently and last summer in Honolulu. We're delighted to have Mayor Barnett, the president of the Conference of Mayors, with us, really our nation's mayor. Mayor Barnett.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Mickey, for those kind words. It is a privilege to be with you, as always, and a privilege to just to thank you for the work that you've done, the leadership you've shown with the Latino Leaders Network. It's an amazing organization that has impacted our country, and you, sir, deserve so much credit for that. And as president of the United States Conference of Mayors, it's my privilege to be here briefly to just recognize one of our own, a bright, shining star in our nation who bolted onto the scene as the mayor of Miami just a few years ago and has been making a positive impact every day since. Mayor Francis Suarez is a good friend, a dynamic leader, and a passionate advocate for America's cities. We've stood side by side talking about things that are important to both of our communities, like advocating for background checks for guns, and more recently talking about the critical and urgent need for federal funding for America's cities as we deal with this coronavirus pandemic. Mayor Suarez has led openly as he's discussed and shared his personal journey with COVID-19 and has given all of us a better sense and a better understanding of what it's like to lead with empathy and vision. I'm proud to be your friend, Francis. Appreciate your leadership. On behalf of all of the mayors in the Conference of Mayors, congratulations on a job well done. You lead and will continue to follow. God bless and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Mayor Barnett, for that greeting. And now, an honorary tribute. The Antonio Villaraigosa Leadership Award was first presented in 2012 in Orlando to Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa at the conclusion of his term as president of the Conference of Mayors. At that time, the board of directors agreed to retitle the award in Antonio's honor to really recognize his outstanding leadership and commitment to bringing communities of color together. The 41st mayor of the city of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, joins us now to deliver a tribute to our honoree. Mayor Villaraigosa.
It's my honor today to acknowledge and honor Miami's mayor, America's mayor, Francis Suarez. And we're not honoring him today just because he's one of the youngest mayors in the country. We're not honoring him today because Time Magazine calls him one of the 100 up-and-coming young leaders in the world. We're honoring him because he's a bridge builder. We're honoring him because he's a uniter. And at this time in our country, a time of pandemic when all of us have been at home for the last 3 months, Mayor Suarez has been at home, sick with COVID-19. Notwithstanding, he's continued to perform his duties as mayor of Miami. He's continued to be an example for what we all should do during this pandemic. And to add one crisis on top of the other, as we all know, we have the social upheaval that we're seeing all across America, including in Miami. And I've watched Mayor Suarez as he speaks eloquently to the racial oppression in our country, to the disparity and the disparate treatment with which we treat African American men, particularly in our country. at the hands of law enforcement. I've heard him say, we need to stand up and fight for the notion that in a great and just America, we all have to be treated with dignity. We all have to be treated equally. And we honor him today because it's important that we have the bridge builders, the peacemakers, the people who understand that every one of us have a right to enjoy and live the American dream, free from the scourge of racism and bigotry. We need those uniters right now. And so I couldn't be prouder to acknowledge Francis Suarez for being a uniter, for being a peacemaker, for being someone who understands that America has a lot of work to do. And I think with you, Francis, as one of our young leaders, modeling for others what we should all be like, I think we'll be a better country and a better place. God bless you. Congratulations. We couldn't be prouder of you on this day and every day.
Thank you, Antonio. And now the award presentation. Mayor Suarez, on behalf of the Latino Leaders Network, it's my pleasure to present you with the Antonio Villaraigosa Leadership Award for your outstanding leadership during a time of crisis. Congratulations, Mayor Suarez. The mayor will now accept the award and deliver remarks. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Mickey. I'm so honored. I'm such a big fan and admirer of the namesake of this award, Mayor Villaraigosa from Los Angeles. I'm so appreciative of the Latino Leaders Network for this recognition. As Mayor Villaraigosa was saying, I have modeled myself after leaders like him who have spent their career being unifiers, spent their career in the pursuit of justice, in the pursuit of fairness, in the pursuit of a peaceful and more equitable city. Something that we strive for as mayors every single day, something that is an ever ongoing battle. And when we see a pandemic like COVID, followed by the civil unrest that we've seen throughout the country, we realize that now more than ever, it's the moment where we have to, from a generational perspective, seize on this opportunity to effectuate the kind of change that will promote a lasting benefit for our children, for our generation, and for our unborn grandchildren. So for me, it's just a tremendous honor to be someone who is one generation away from being an immigrant to this country. My father came when he was 12 years old, my mother when she was 5, and they both were given an opportunity to be successful in this country, to be educated, and in the case of my father, to have the opportunity to serve and lead in this community. I mean, how many countries allow for something like that to happen? And so I'm very honored that my father was the first Cuban-American mayor of the city of Miami. And I'm very honored to be the first Miami-born mayor of the city of Miami in over 120-year history of our city. We've had many, many great leaders that preceded me, and we're going to have many, many great leaders that follow. And so for me, having the opportunity to lead in this time of crisis and to lead during this generation is something that I am particularly proud of. I'm very encouraged by many of the things that I see in this generation and in the subsequent generation to follow. I think that, our conversations on climate, our conversations on racial inequity, our conversations on economic inequity are the kinds of conversations that are going to define our future and define our present service. And I am committed to looking at innovative ways to try to solve those macro issues in our country. And so for me, having this recognition of a mayor that I'm so proud to call a friend, and I've also seen the tradition of prior recipients of the Antonio Villaraigosa Leadership Award who have come from a variety of different walks of life and are many of which are former mayors and our friends and are people who I admire tremendously and know today. So for me, I'm just overwhelmed with a sense of humility that the Latino Leaders Network would choose to recognize me of all the leaders that they could recognize in the world and in the nation. I'm incredibly humbled and appreciative of this recognition, and I can use this as a means of committing and recommitting to my purpose, which is to make a better city, to make a better country, and ultimately to make a better world.
Congratulations again, Mayor Suarez. We all are very proud of you. And now for a conversation with Mayor Suarez. It's going to be moderated by Maria Elena Salinas from Univision, currently a CBS News contributor and a past recipient of our Eagle Leadership Award at our Luncheon Series event in Los Angeles in 2015. Maria Elena, we are delighted to have you with us again. The show now is all yours. Wow, we're just told here that Maria Elena we just lost connection with her, so I guess it's inaudible. What we can do is we're trying to get her back on now. I'm wondering, should we just go ahead and continue? I'll be glad to talk with Mayor Suarez. Let me go ahead and begin. You are a COVID-19 survivor. Here you are, mayor of Miami. And of course, the virus knows no boundaries. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us, if you would, a bit about that experience, how it was that you were able to remain mayor of the city and get yourself healthy again. Please talk to us about COVID-19, your experience.
It was, and I think Maria Elena might be on now, but it was an incredible experience from the moment that I found out that I was, hey, how are you? From the moment I found out that I was infected with COVID, it was sort of a surreal experience. I got the call, I think it was March 13th in the morning. And the doctor said, I was trying to reach you last night just to let you know that you're positive. And I was shocked. I mean, everybody who had tested with me that day was negative. And, I know I had been with a delegation of foreign, members of this foreign delegation for 2 days and a couple of hours. And, and there were apparently several people that got infected in that delegation, but I had no expectation. I was completely asymptomatic. And so I had to immediately, of course, go into quarantine. And thanks to this new world that we're in, and I know some people think that the sort of new normal is sort of an overused cliche in the last few months, but this new normal that we find ourselves in today, we would normally be giving this award in person. But this new platforms that we have now, where we're able to be virtually anywhere, allowed me to be able to battle COVID-19 and at the same time be able to serve the citizens of my community. And I was able to do that while at the same time doing a diary, which allowed me to share the experience with the entire world. Really, I got text messages from as far as Canada and Australia of people who were watching the diary entries and had a sense of hope that, if I was okay, that they would be okay. Most people at that time were on the other side of the aisle. They were trying to get tested, were worried about, whether there would be enough tests available. And it was a very trying time for myself personally, for our city. But I'm very fortunate that we were able to pull through, and that after the 18th day of quarantine, I was able to come out healthy, and I've been healthy ever since.
Well, thank you very much, Mickey, for starting out for me. And I'm sorry, somehow I got disconnected. I have to be very careful. I touched something and suddenly got disconnected. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Mickey, for inviting me. Señor Alcalde, un placer. Felicidades. Congratulations on this award. And for full disclosure, Mayor Suarez is my mayor. I live in Miami. In fact, I live across the street from City Hall, and I could actually wave to City Hall if you're the one in Coconut Grove. So I live right across the street. So thank you for everything you do. Since you've already started talking about the fact that you had COVID, and that was one of my questions. But I want to ask you about when it all started, because even before there were any cases in Miami, you decided to take action. You began by canceling iconic events in Miami, Ultra, Calle Ocho, which is, everyone was very surprised. What led you to do that? There were no cases at the time.
We were talking with with an epidemiologist from FIU, Dr. Marty, who and we were consulting with the CDC, and the CDC recommendation that recommended that we should not allow large congregations of events with a population of 25,000 or more. We had, as you said, Ultra, which was a music festival that was going to congregate 100,000 people in a small park, and Calle Ocho, which is about 250,000 people that would have been congregated in a street, which is very, very narrow. And so we felt, and I felt that, I did not want to risk the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, and not just the people that went to those festivals, but if there was an outbreak, the people that they could potentially infect. And so, I made the tough decision, and by the way, consulted with a variety of mayors around the country who were facing very similar decisions. And I don't think it was until the NBA and some of the major sports franchises decided to cancel their seasons or postpone their seasons that people really look back on that decision that I made as a prophetic one, as opposed to one that some criticized as premature at the time.
The Miami area has the most amount of cases in Florida, the most deaths in Florida. Why is Miami such a hot spot?
We're a hot spot in Florida because we're the largest city, we're the densest city. And so it just sort of by the numbers, you would expect that we would have the most cases, but we have been extremely, proactive, not just in canceling the large events, but we were, I think, the second city that implemented a stay-at-home order. I was actually battling with my city attorney for about a week trying to get it implemented earlier. We would have been the first city. We were the first city to implement a curfew. I think the second city to implement requirements for people to wear masks. So, I mean, we did all of the things that the experts asked us to do. I just think the sheer fact is that, and I was case number 2, by the way, in all of Dade County. And right now we're over 20,000 cases, but we are a population of 3 million people. And so, and the city is about, roughly 500,000 with about, 2/3 of those cases. And so, it's just something where we have a tremendous amount of density and people are very close to each other. And so I think that's what's led to us being number one in the state.
I understand from, according to my daughter, that you donated plasma because you had the antibodies. That plasma ended up saving the life of one of her friend's father, and that's why I know you did. Talk about leading by example. Why did you make the decision to donate plasma? I mean, you're a very busy guy, yet you took the time to do it.
It was really interesting. Well, first of all, I went through a very strict testing protocol. As mayor and as someone who comes into contact with thousands of people. And one of the first things I had to do is disclose the fact that I had COVID. Other people don't necessarily have that requirement or don't have to necessarily do that, but I did. And that meant that, 50 or so people had to get tested just to make sure that I hadn't passed it on and created a mass infection in my government. But I also had to go through a very strict testing protocol to come out of quarantine so that people would feel comfortable that I could be safely in public. And understanding that I was one of the first cases to go in, I was going to be one of the first cases to come out of quarantine as well. And so we sort of wanted to do everything perfect so that we could set the example. So when my second consecutive negative test on day 18 came back in a 24-hour period, I got reached out to at the same time by a company called One Blood and by a family that was asking for me to donate plasma. It just so happens that my blood type did match that particular donor. So I felt a moral responsibility to donate and was able to donate and was, I think, the first convalescent plasma donor in Florida and the 4th or 5th in the nation.
Well, that's great. Leading by example. Thank you so much. Now, South Florida has been the last area to open up the businesses. You didn't always agree with the timeline, first with the governor and then also with the mayor of Miami-Dade. How did you make the decision that it's time? Llegó la hora.
Well, like you said, we were the city that had the most cases. So I think, we had to be the most careful. And so I think, thankfully, the rules are such that the governor and the county mayor allowed us to go at our own pace. And so I think that was important because one size doesn't fit all with respect to COVID. And urban cities are different from rural areas or smaller cities throughout Miami-Dade County. So I was able to go at the pace that we felt comfortable with. We did it in combination with some of the major cities in Dade County. We did it with Hialeah, Miami Beach, and Miami Gardens. And we did it at a slightly slower pace because, of course, we were worried. And by the way, we're still worried. We are worried because the cases are ticking back up. We went from a downward slope of about 13 cases per day over a 30-day period to a downward slope of 7 cases per day, which is about half the rate of diminishment. So that's a concern. And that does not incorporate Memorial Day weekend. That does not incorporate the protest, which we know that there's been thousands of people congregated in ways that we wouldn't normally recommend for other reasons, which are appropriate. But that does cause concern in terms of COVID.
Well, in case the cases continue to go up, and like you said, there's been a huge spike in cases. Just, I think yesterday was 1,900 new cases in Florida. That's quite a bit. The day before, 1,600 new cases in Florida.
Had in the entire time.
Yeah, so it's not getting better, it's getting worse. If they continue to spike, would you consider another shutdown? Is that something that is in the realm of possibilities?
Yeah. You have to consider it. You know what I mean? Everything has to be, every tool at our disposition has to be on the table. I think what's unfortunate and sort of makes it more difficult now is, when we did the first shutdown, our economy was humming. We were at full employment. And, when it happened, people were somewhat understanding, and they said, okay, well, things are going to shut down, but, there's a health crisis, there's a pandemic, we need to do that. As time went on, you realize government does not have the ability to sustain an economy where people are not able to go to work in great measure. And so that is a huge concern. And I think what's happened is after a few months where we went from, record levels of unemployment to depression-like levels of unemployment, 40 million people on unemployment nationally, that changes the landscape and the conversation a little bit. And it makes us understand that whatever remedies we put in, we have to be conscientious of the economic impact of what they're going to mean for our communities, particularly our disadvantaged communities, because we know that obviously the wealthy in our community have the means and have the ability to potentially take a month off or but it's those that are at the lowest end of the economic spectrum that get hurt the most. Those are the ones that have had to go on unemployment. Those are the ones that have had to take out PPP loans for their small businesses to survive. And so those are the ones that I'm most concerned about. And those are the ones that we've been feeding. And so, we want to get to a point where we can hopefully safely open the economy so that people can continue to have hopefully a premium level quality of life to the maximum extent that they can, and hope that we don't have to reverse so many things. But obviously everything has to be at our disposition.
Right. This is a question that comes, I think, including myself. What does the new normal look like in Miami?
Not so many hugs and kisses, no. I think.
I know. I've been thinking about that because people say you shouldn't shake hands. What happens to the Latinos that we don't shake hands, we hug and we kiss? Yeah. And I mean, our culture is going to be very hurt by this.
I think for now, the new normal is definitely people wearing masks, when they're indoors. I think the new normal is sort of the elbow bump as opposed to the handshaking. Obviously, we have to continue to wash our hands. Hygiene has to be a priority. My wife, I'm not going to give you all the things that she makes me do when I get home, but it's an extensive protocol of disinfecting myself. Even though I had COVID, there's always the fear that, that somehow I could, be a transmitter to members of my family. Thankfully, none of them got sick when I did. But there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty, and so we're trying to day in and day out do the very, very best that we can.
Thank you very much, Mayor Suarez. Let's move on to the next subject, which I think is very, very, very important. We've seen protests all over the country, all over the world for that matter, after the murder of George Floyd, including Miami. There was some violence in Miami in the first few days, but minimal. What do you attribute that to?
So many things. I think we've become a model, national model. I think there's so many things. I mean, there's so many things that I can detail. First, we were very restrained as a police department. We in the first protest on Saturday, we did not use tactical shields or anything of that nature for the first 3 hours when the protesters were scheduled to protest. Later on at night, there were some arrests for violations of curfew, and there was some destruction of property, very minimal looting. On day one, we made some tactical changes on day two and avoided that essentially, and hadn't had an arrest until Thursday of this week. But I think it also goes to, we've had some difficult incidents in the past. We had the McDuffie riots in 1980. We had the Lozano riots in 1989. When I was a commissioner, I had to fire a police chief because there was a policy that led to the shooting of 7 African Americans in 1 year. And so we've had our fair share of situations between our police officers and the African American community, and we've used those as a means of getting closer to that community, of creating stronger bonds with the African American community. And we've done that through investing. We created a poverty initiative. We invested, a tremendous amount in community-based organizations. We have continued to have conversations with them that have led to police reforms over the years. We're well led with a good police chief, who, by the way, came out right away and condemned the acts of the officers, which is something that doesn't always happen. Oftentimes police officers have a reluctance to criticize other police officers, but it was important that our chief immediately came out and condemned what had happened to George Floyd. So I think there's a combination of all those things. And listen, we're not out of the woods yet. There are protests scheduled for today, for tomorrow, for Sunday, and what we want to do is first give people an opportunity to express themselves. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of pain and anger, which is justifiable. And then we want to take and capitalize this moment. We don't want this to just be a fleeting moment, like so many things, an incident occurs and then, the topic is, gun regulation, for example. And then the next thing happens and we move on to the next topic. We want to make sure that doesn't happen here. I've been in conversations with many mayors throughout the country, and I think their objective is to get some lasting and meaningful reform before, the media cycle may decide to go to some other event. So my hope is that doesn't happen and that we're able to get the kind of reform that will advance race relations in our country for another generation.
As you mentioned, of course, the history that Miami has with tension between the African American community and the police departments. We know that the Miami Police Department has been investigated several times by both Department of Justice and local civilian oversight groups for abuse. Do you believe that there are bad apples in the Miami Police Department, or that there is systematic racism in the police department in Miami?
I think that every department, unfortunately, has, I don't even like the term bad apples, because I was watching a comedian skit, and he was saying that actually kind of sounds nice, a bad apple, sometimes you eat a bad apple. No, I think that there are racists in every organization. And I think that the Miami Police Department is no different from any other organization. And they do have that. And I think our job is to identify that, B, hold those people accountable, and if possible, remove them from being a police officer and find ways to make it easier, particularly if they have excessive use of force complaints. And I think the other part of it is we have to do a better job of training our officers through the academy and throughout their career. In the law, there's something called continuing legal education, meaning to keep your bar license, you have to continually be studying and learning the new law. I think the same thing should apply to police officers. I think to keep your police licensing, you should have to be required to do implicit bias training and a variety of de-escalation, trainings that would be beneficial. And I think, that's something that has to come out of this, and I think we have an obligation to make sure that our officers are the very best trained, the very best equipped, and the very best people that we can find. And I think that's something it's going to be a challenge, not only for us, but for every department in America.
Right. Everyone is thinking about either defund the police or look for ways to reform the police, make some changes. Miami-Dade police department has already taken one step, which is banning the practice of chokeholds. Is this something that Miami Police Department should also do?
We've actually done that years ago. So I think, unfortunately, Miami-Dade is kind of catching up to the city of Miami on that one. We had banned chokeholds years ago. We have applied all the 8 can't wait principles years ago. And Miami-Dade, we just put a resolution of our commission urging them to create a civilian oversight panel, which is something that we have, a civilian investigative panel in the city of Miami. We've had that for years as well. So I do think that those reforms are coming to Miami-Dade. Having said that, I still think that we can do better. And I think that we must do better. And I think we need to capitalize on this moment to do better. And I think if we don't, and if we sit back and say, we're fine, there's no issues, then I think that is a disservice to the memory of George Floyd and the memory of the tragedy of that event and the despicableness of that event. Not just for the officer who murdered George Floyd, but for the 3 other officers who did nothing and stood by and watched it. And so it is a watershed moment in the history of our country, and we're hopeful that it will promote change from within and also for other departments.
Yeah, you run a city that is very diverse in its ethnicity and its political views and socioeconomic backgrounds. Well, that's one thing that makes Miami so rich culturally. It also has created a lot of disparity and inequality. How do we come together as a city in times like this to create a more just society?
A few ways. I think first is we have to invest in our children. One of the things that I did as mayor of the city of Miami is we created a child savings account so that every child in the city, even though we don't control the school system and that's a separate entity from the city, every child in the city will get a savings account opened up for them by the city and money deposited into that account. Because what we've seen in the studies, they show that children and parents, by the way, who get financial literacy training are much more likely to be successful later on down the line. So that's something that the city has done. We also have to continue to focus on vocational training. We have a program called Career in a Year that we're helping fund so that, children or adults, young adults who maybe don't want to go to college have the ability to get vocational training and get into a job that's a high paying job. So I think, for us to be serious about the equity discussion, the first thing we have to do is invest in ourselves. Right. We talk a lot about, and I was saying this on a mayoral panel yesterday, we talk a lot about infrastructure, right? And infrastructure usually means brick and mortar. It means highways, it means railways. But what I was telling the mayors yesterday is our biggest infrastructure, our most important infrastructure is ourselves, is our people, right? And so we need to be investing in ourselves. And if we are, and if we do, and that's a little bit of the defund, I think a little bit of the defund conversation is about, we're not devoting enough resources to our people, you know what I mean? To whether it's mental health, whether it's social issues, whether it's education, you know what I mean? Those are areas that have been traditionally underfunded. And so those are areas that we have to look at to better fund.
I have so many more questions, but not enough time for all of them. Let me just end with this, which is the question that I was originally going to start with. You could say that you have, politics in your blood, like you mentioned before. Your father was a mayor. I imagine you grew up in the office that you now hold, that you now occupy. And in spite of your young age, you've been in politics for a long time. Did the previous experiences prepare you for the challenges that you're facing today as the mayor of Miami?
I think the answer is no doubt that it did. I can tell you when I was 12 years old, it was 1989, and I saw my dad walk through the riots right before a Super Bowl that was in Miami. And I remember it very vividly. I remember the fear of my dad leaving the house and not being sure whether he would come back. And that was a very real fear to a 12-year-old at the time. And so those are things, and I saw his bravery, his courage, his connection to the city in a way that, I got to peek behind the curtain and see it. And so I think that, he sent me a text message the other day when we were in the midst of this. He said, there's nobody that can be better prepared to lead our city during this crisis than you, because I've lived it. And so, I'm very fortunate. I have a wonderful support system. My wife, my 2 children, my parents, my sisters, their husbands. I'm very, very lucky to have the kind of support that I have. And it's frankly what allows me in many ways to be successful is knowing that I have so many people that I can rely on, friends and family and staff that are amazing. And elected officials who have been supportive of me that are from both parties, and from, my own council. In times like this, the more support you have, the more you have the ability to be yourself and to be confident in who you are and in terms of leading. And listen, every single person who's out there, who's watching this, who is considering leading, I'm going to make a personal plea that you take that plunge. And I know it's hard because, you have people that will criticize you. And on every issue, I've been talking to people today, and on every issue, there's 2 sides of it. And they want to push you to one side and pick a side. And really the reality is that you should only be on the side of your residents. And that's the side you have to be on, and everything else will work itself out.
Thank you very much. I wish I could spend a little more time chatting with you and learning about you and talking that's right? Coming to telling people all the wonderful things that you have done, like give your phone number away so that the protesters could text you and ask you questions and tell you their concerns. That's just one of the many things that you do as the mayor of Miami. Thank you very much. Felicidades, un reconocimiento muy, muy merecido. And thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this event. It's always a pleasure to see you. It's always a pleasure to hear from you and to see the great work that you are doing on behalf of our community. And in this case, sort of like drawing attention to our mayors and the great things that they're doing in our cities and the challenges that they face also. So thank you, Mickey.
Great job, Maria Elena, and thanks so much. I mean, you really did help us share with our viewers why it is that Mayor Suarez is so deserving of the Latino Leaders Network Award today. And I also want to thank Mayor Barnett, Mayor Villaraigosa, certainly congratulate Mayor Suarez once again for his leadership. And also, of course, our sponsors who made today possible, as well as all of you viewers who tuned in. Before leaving you, let me ask you to take a look at our curriculum guide. It's a new learning resource made available to support our book, Latino Leaders Speak. Take a look. It includes 12 Latino leaders who share learning lessons that would be valuable to us all. Take a look, please, at latinoleadersnetwork.org. With that, we conclude the 33rd Tribute to Mayors. Thank you for joining us, and please look for future invitations. Thank you.